Where there's despair in life, let me bring hope. Where there is darkness, only light. And where there's sadness, ever joy. Oh, Master, grant that I may never seek so much to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love with all my soul. Make me a channel of your peace. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned, in giving of ourselves that we receive, and in dying that we're born to eternal life. Oh, Master, grant that I may never seek so much to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love with all my soul. Make me a channel of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me bring your love. Where there is injury, your pardon, Lord. And where there's doubt, true faith in you.
Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me so love. Where there is injury, let me so pardon. Where there is doubt, let there be faith. Where there's despair, let me so hope. Where there is darkness, let there be light. Where there is sadness, joy. Oh, divine Master, grant that I may never seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. To
Pax et Bonum. Previously on Fireside Chats, we traveled through history to discover how the Franciscans landed in the Philippines, how they fulfilled their mission, and how it has made an impact on us today. We revealed how our parish, Santuario de San Antonio, found its home in Forbes Park, Makati. We also learned about the Franciscans, the different orders and branches. At the end of the episode, we concluded with this reflection question. What is it about the Franciscan order that puts you in a unique position to evangelize to Philippines? Let us listen to the sharing of Luis Revilla for this reflection question.
Good afternoon. I'm Bibi Revilla, and I'm a permanent deacon for the Diocese of Oakland in California, and I'm a professed member of the Secular Franciscan Order. I was asked to share some of my thoughts on the reflection question asked last week. Let me start with sharing an experience that occurred almost 3 decades ago. At that time, I was a student at the Jesuit School of Theology in Berkeley. The Jesuit School was part of a consortium which included 8 other seminaries. Part of it was a Franciscan School of Theology. We were encouraged to take courses in the other theologiates, and I was lucky enough to take quite a number of courses with the Franciscan School of Theology. So much so that I was teased at the conclusion of my studies. Friends came up and asked me, "So which do you prefer, the Franciscan or the Jesuit?" Well, it made me pause and think. And I came up with the Jesuits formed and equipped me for ministry, while the Franciscan showed me how to live it. In other words, the Jesuit gave me a good academic foundation and formation, while the Franciscan pastorally engaged me into living out that faith. I guess it can be expressed in one of the sayings of St. Francis, which goes, "Preach the gospel always, and when necessary, use words." It isn't so much what we know, but it's about who we are and what we do. Not in the building, but in the world. St. Francis himself, in his calling, was called at the chapel of San Damiano, where Jesus, through the crucifix, spoke to him and said, "Francis, repair my church. As you see, it has fallen into ruin." With great joy, Francis stood up, thinking that it was the building, gathered stones together with the brothers that helped him out, and repaired and rebuilt that church. In fact, he did many more. But in the process of doing the repairs and the ministry that he did in the world, he began to ask himself, just maybe, Jesus didn't only mean the building, but rather church, the body of Christ. And since then, he started moving out, gathering living stones, now repairing the church, the body of Christ. Similar experience with the Franciscans here occurred not too long ago. Let me recount, starting with a story that Bishop Ambo David of the Diocese of Caloocan shared in a talk he gave a while back. In it, he was recounting the times that he started visiting the parishes in his diocese after he was invested. And there was this one particular parish where, as they waited, he started seeing the pews fill up, then the aisles, and then the outside. And he looked to the priest and said, "Is this normal?" And the priest said, "Yes, Bishop." "How many attend the Mass?" And he said, "Bishop, between 1,000 to 1,100, depending on the overflow outside." "And how many Masses?" 10 Masses on a weekend. Calculating in his mind, 10 to 11,000. He was pleasantly surprised. And the next question he asked was, "How big is your church population?" And he was told 120 to 130,000. And his heart sank because even if he tripled the Masses, it wouldn't be enough to be able to accommodate his Catholic population. Why do I share this? Because in that same diocese, not too long ago, the Franciscans started a mission, not with a church, not with a chapel, just a friar living with the people, gathering living stones. When they gathered enough living stones, they built a chapel. And since then, the chapel has been outgrown by the church. That is St. Clare's Parish in Dagat-Dagatan. In fact, they're one of the beneficiaries of our fiesta this October 4 to build a bigger church, a bigger building to accommodate the growing church. The Franciscans have not stopped with that, but have also moved out another mission in the resettlement area in the Congressional District and Commonwealth. And I think they now have a chapel, which I think even the church is beginning to outgrow. It started as a model that was picked up. I think Bishop Ambo has also started missions now manned by religious women, by Jesuit volunteers and Jesuit seminarians, building and gathering by living stones, building community, church, the body of Christ. And hopefully, as time comes, is to build a chapel. Very much so, I think that type of Franciscan living becomes goes hand in hand with the new evangelization called for. For it isn't so much the celebration in the building, but rather how we live life in the world that gives us what we need to gather, the charism, so that when we go to the building, we have a celebratory Eucharist. That is what we are called to be, and that's the Franciscan way of living. So I invite anyone who loves Francis, who wants to be a friend of Francis, aside from the first order, second and third order. All you have to do is preach the gospel, and when necessary, use words. Live out the gospel faith in your lives. And with that, I bid you peace and all good. Pax et bonum.
Thank you, Biwi, for sharing with us your reflection. Today, we will get to know more about another Franciscan charism, stewardship and grace. This episode is entitled Stewardship, a Way of Life. And our guest for today is Father Rayu Galoy, OFM. Let me turn you over to our two moderators, Len Hizon and Dennis Montecillo, co-heads of the Education and Formation Ministry at SSAP.
Welcome to FRIARSIDE CHATS. Today we're blessed to welcome back Father Rayu Galoy, OFM, our parish priest at Santuario de San Antonio Parish. Welcome back, Father Rayu.
Thank you, and good morning.
Hello, Father. It's good to have you back. And in a previous chat, we were talking about JPIC, which is really justice, peace, and integrity of creation, a very huge, broad topic. And for today's session, we would like to sort of find a relationship between JPIC and stewardship, another huge, broad topic. Can you help us and the viewers understand a little bit about that?
Okay,
thank you for, of course, allowing me to connect justice and peace and stewardship. No? But let me first highlight the following points in relation to JPIC. Basically, the justice and peace and integrity of creation is a praxis that would challenge us to establish right relationships. So it's with God, with other people, with creation, and with the self. But of course, it's not just establishing, or I would say, the product of a right relationship should also be a life-giving relationship. And I think that highlights, the advocacy for justice, peace, and integrity of creation. Anyway, we can discuss it in more details, maybe, and hopefully in the future. Because I do understand we also have a very limited time to really go into the details and deeper about the subject matter. So, the connection now, the relationship between justice, peace, and integrity of creation as to stewardship can also be viewed basically in terms of the model of our understanding on who we are, whose we are, and what we also have, or what we are supposed to do, with our life. So, corollary to the view of environmental justice is stewardship. Okay? And therefore, I think let's go back a little. I think this is essential when we talk about stewardship in general, from the biblical point of view. Because, for instance, there's really a misinterpretation of what we can find in Genesis chapter 1,
Yes.
26 to 28, about the dominion model.
Yes.
So the dominion model, I think, has been the prevalent model. That is why the whole idea of control, domination, has been the practice, even, of course, within the Christian community. But anyway, from our Christian view, move actually from this dominion model to a stewardship model. So when we talk about stewardship model, this is where when we find ourselves being instructed by God that we have, for instance, to till the earth. Okay? Or to go back a little, the earth is God's gift to us. Now, from the beginning, it's God's gift to us. And so there was a call for us to till and keep it.
Yes.
Okay? And maybe we would go as far as when we talk about tilling the earth, it's more on the idea of serving it. So to till is to serve the earth. To keep it is to protect Mother Earth. So that I think that I would say constitute the model of stewardship as opposed to the model of dominion. And maybe before I allow you to ask me your second question,
Okay.
let me first point this out, that the first man, Adam, as we all know, Adama in Hebrew, which means earth.
Yes.
And earth in Latin is humus.
Mhm.
And when you translate it, it's humility. And so now, maybe later on when we move forward, discussing about stewardship, we should never forget that whole idea that we as a human person is basically an embodiment of humility. Unfortunately, it has not been the consciousness of many people, or I would say even about many Christians or Catholics, no? That humility is who we are.
Yes.
It's in our very nature. It's not something that is apart from us, but it's our identity. So we serve and protect Mother Earth as an expression of our humility. Maybe if we go forward a little, when we go back to the creation story, when God, see everything that He has done, and they're all good. It's not only the human person,
Right.
the human being. Everything that God created is good. And this, I would say, is foundational to our stewardship.
In fact, Father, since you mentioned humility, it seems to the popular imagination to be so countercultural because, in modern parlance, stewardship, to your point, implies power, control, the ability to lead or marshal resources. And it's so counter to the idea of humility, right?
Mhm, mhm.
And even this, there was a book that came out titled Servant Leadership. It almost sounds like an oxymoron to be a servant and a leader at
And
the
a
same
leader
time.
at
And
the same
yet,
time.
I think what you're suggesting is that stewardship, in fact, is an embodiment of humility. You can't really be a good steward if you don't have that approach to stewardship, because otherwise it's not stewardship, it's dominion or it's
Mhm.
dominance, which is the exact opposite of what I'm hearing from you.
And and to add to that, I'd like to go back a little bit. We had, in a previous conversation, you were telling us about the creation story, and I think it was a very important point that you said that what Adam and Eve did was really not about disobedience, but about possession, and that really emphasizes your dominion theory model. And can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I think it would be helpful for all of us to clarify it was not disobedience,
Mhm.
possession.
Okay. Yeah. We really can attribute this to on how Saint Francis viewed himself in relation to the entire of creation. And so, for instance, let's begin with Francis thinking of himself as really as over and above the rest of creation. But he is just one of God's creation. So his attitude towards nature, recognizing that everything is God's gift, he should never have any just inkling of possessing something. So his response to God's gift to humanity, to us, is that of expropriation. Because everything is God's gift and everything belongs to God. So I have in no way appropriate something for myself. And in the story of that, the creation story about, Adam and Eve, it was actually their desire. They did not, for the interpretation, they did not disobey God for Francis. The disobedience was already the external manifestation of what is inside, who wanted to possess, who wanted to be more knowledgeable than God. No? It's because they were forbidden to eat the tree of knowledge. But then, because they wanted to possess that knowledge,
Yes.
the consequence was disobedience. So Francis, I think, I would say, he went basically to the most fundamental of this whole story. So there are some manifestations, but the manifestations, the indicators, can only be seen maybe from above, but there's deep inside, the person. So his response is, and his basic principle in life really is to not to appropriate anything. Because even just by the very way of thinking, no? To think that I have something is already an act of stealing something from God, what
Yes.
belongs to God.
Yes.
So, and maybe if I will, like for instance, I go further, in our profession, we don't use the word poverty. In our three evangelical councils, no? Obedience, chastity, we don't use the word poverty. We use the word nothing of my own. So expropriation. And that I think would somehow give us an idea why also to Saint Francis, humility is very much at the heart of his life.
That's such a powerful statement, Father, because again, the popular wisdom is poverty, chastity, obedience as the profession. And what you're saying is it's not poverty, but nothing of my own, which is similar to, but it's really it's a much more all-encompassing perspective than poverty. Because like disobedience and attachment, poverty is really, you could argue, just a manifestation, not the manifestation of nothing of your own, right? Because it's from that all of the other Franciscan values seem to stem, it seems to me.
Yeah, because poverty can also be interpreted in different ways. For
Correct.
instance, poverty in spirit, will
Correct.
it be a material poverty?
Yeah, yeah.
When you say nothing of my own, I think it's very clear.
Exactly. It's right on point, right? It's right on point. Yeah.
Nothing should belong to you because
Yeah.
everything belongs to God.
Yes.
So it's interesting, and correct me if I'm wrong, Father, what I'm understanding is, at its very root, it's really intention. The
Yes.
intention within. And whatever is out there, like disobedience or whatever the manifestation is, it really is just an outcropping of what my intention is.
Mhm.
It's to possess, or to control, or to have dominion over. And I'm thinking, I don't think Francis would say don't use anything, or don't take advantage of what nature has to offer. But what you're just saying is that we should not be attached
Mm-hmm.
to. Is that what I'm hearing you say, Father? It's like not to be attached to whatever we are using, and that whatever we are using, let's say we use a tree to create the paper that we're writing on right now, we will have to give back
Yes.
and replace
Mm-hmm.
whatever we use, because everything in nature is for us, for God's creation is for all of us to utilize, but we have to replace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think just moving forward, we also have to ask the question of what is the intention, for instance, of the Creator? Why God created this whole world so beautifully, so wonderfully? Maybe if we are to understand the intention of the Creator, and if our understanding of the intention of God is that we create community, then again, when we go back to the idea of stewardship, no? Our stewardship is directed always towards building a community. And when I say community, it's not just in reference to human beings,
Yes.
but it's a community of all of God's creation. So each and every creature has its own value that each and every one of us also has to honor.
Yeah.
So that I suppose would challenge even our mentality when we talk about stewardship. Because maybe if I would say, okay, let's move forward a little when it comes to the practical side of stewardship. No? What are some fundamental questions that we have to ask, for instance? Because for one, I mean, the first thing we will have to ask ourselves, we have to evaluate how do we use, no, uh, our resources. How do we use our resources? That's one question. Second, maybe we also have to examine our own consumptions. Uh, Sobra-sobra na ba?
Yeah, yeah.
No, yung ating consumption. Third, I would say, we also have to consider na we are accountable not actually from our ancestors. We are accountable to the coming generation,
Yes, that's right.
to the next generation. So that we have to, factor in our stewardship. And then, of course, the last part would be, are we bearing more fruit with our stewardship? Because I think if we have to quantify eventually how good we are in our stewardship, it's the fruits that we bring into this earth that would also count.
Yes, yes, yes.
So,
Father, you touched on a point, and I want to bring this up before we leave the book of Genesis, even though there are 72 others that we can talk about. But this idea of stewardship, it strikes me, to tie it back to something else that was in Genesis, is that in addition to God saying that everything that He created is good, He also said, when He created man and woman, that it was very good. And just to tie this back to stewardship and our responsibility as human beings, apart from coexisting and caring for and being sensitive to everything around us, nature, we also have in a sense, a leadership responsibility, right? As human beings, being created in the image of God, to care for the rest of creation. And it is maybe is that what stewardship really, in a sense, is that the word that captures our role in all of creation?
I would take it more as that brings in greater responsibility on our side.
Yes, 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 yes.
And that responsibility that God shared with us does not only associated with our identity, as creature in the likeness and image of God, but I think it's also in relation to us being co-creators of
Even
God.
more,
Yeah, so when we become co-creators of God, I would say, as human beings, we should have an understanding of why God created all these things.
I see.
In other words, our action should also be a reflection, a manifestation of God's hands or of God's work. Diba? Parang, kasi tayo na yung representative niya.
Yes, yes, yes.
So it's like we are ambassadors.
Yeah,
no?
yeah.
So we, as an ambassador, as co-creator of God, we have, I would say, although it's too much to expect it from us, but I would say that's part of our mission, that we understand the feelings of God. We understand the mind of God. So we simply execute what's in the mind and in the heart of God in our action.
Right.
And therefore, it's not about me, especially in my action. It is always a challenge about God doing in and through me. And I think it takes a lot of humility, especially on the part of us human beings. Because sometimes, when we are succeeding, we sometimes would disregard where we're coming from, or what our mission is all about. Parang iniiwan na natin ng Diyos eh. So we somehow now appropriate not only the role of God,
It becomes about us.
It becomes us na. And I think this is where dito na nagkakaloko-loko na yung maraming
Yeah.
issue about, our care for the mother. Yeah.
I think that's really very interesting, and I'd like to bring us back a little bit to something that you mentioned in our previous chat, Father, about when you were in seminary. Earlier during your early part during your seminary, you were involved in the family business, and it was about owning land and working with the farmers and everything. Can you expound on that a little bit? Because I think it really has a connection with stewardship and your stewardship of the land.
Okay, I think
a very powerful story, and I'd like to touch back on that.
Yeah, because I think it's part of how especially my father would prepare me for something that it might have been his vision for my future. Unfortunately, hindi kami nagkaparehas ng tingin. But I think it's because when he was training me, summertime really is a time for me to work. It's not a fun time. It's really a time really to work.
And you were the eldest?
I'm the eldest. So,
eldest son.
Yeah. So aside from, of course, doing things inside the house, he would also really push me to being involved, especially with some of our tenants. So summertime is time where I have to go around. I was the one in charge of counting, for instance, yung product ng copra, because you will know how many sacks of copra they will produce by just counting how many pieces of coconut. And then I also have to go and check, especially during harvest time, yung sa palay, for the rice. So I was coming really practically from a perspective of we are the ones providing food, for these people. We're the ones providing livelihood for these people. And I grew up that way. But then later on, it was, I think, the time when I actually was not sure whether to continue or not in the Franciscan formation. So, but I had given myself a chance. So I joined the exposure program when I was third year in college. And because of that experience, I was able to have the privilege of looking at the same reality, farming, but from another perspective. Now from the perspective of the farmers, of the tenants in particular. And that really challenged and shift my way of looking at things, especially on how to deal with people working for you. Na I thought the time, no, we're not the one providing them livelihood. We're not the one supporting them, but actually it's the other way around. And then that's the time when I question, there's something wrong with the system. Because I don't know, if my memory gives me the right information right now. It's really like the harvest was more than 120 kabans of rice, of palay. And then just in a matter of, it was not actually the whole day, it's just a half day. With that 120, when it was divided, there's nothing left. So my foster father, in that particular afternoon, it's like he was looking the fields. So I tried to kind of check what it is that he is thinking of. And he told me, I'm starting, to somehow strategize how to begin again for the next cropping. Because all that belongs to him as a share was not even enough to pay for his loans or debts. So that really it shattered me, and that there's something wrong with the system. And again, that becomes a challenge for stewardship, no? Especially in relation to justice and peace. How can that be a life-giving? Was there a just, a right relationship? When at the end of the day, the person who worked so hard ended up nothing. And why is it that because I have the title of that particular piece of land, I have more? So it kind of, pushed me really to reflect deeper on that whole situation, on how we can be steward to each other. And the whole idea of me serving God, because of that experience, parang now I have the human face of God. I know who I'm going to serve, and it helped me, of course, in my discernment process.
It clarified
It
your,
clarified
your
my-
calling.
Yeah.
really, Father.
Mhm.
Calling of the Spirit.
Mhm. Yeah. So it helped. It helped even in terms of practice, no? It helped in terms of how should I relate with people. That whole section of would it be a life-giving relationship? Will it, for instance, promote, build a community? And I think that's essential when we talk about stewardship, because it's interrelated. I think one thing with the stewardship is the interrelations, even in the context of diversity. The call to promoting life is always at the heart of the dynamics.
So the stewardship there, Father, relates to the relationship or responsibility you felt with the tenants
Mhm.
who were doing the work for you.
Mhm.
So I guess my takeaway is, one, it's important to think of stewardship beyond just caring for the environment and the resources, but also the people to whom you are responsible, in this case as a leader, in quotes, and you felt this empathy and responsibility to them, and clearly felt like there was something not in harmony with what stewardship really
Mhm.
means, it sounds like. Yeah.
Yeah, precisely because my point really is, if they are not taken care of well, it will affect the produce.
Yes.
Yes.
And if there's no much produce, it will also affect the one,
Yeah, it's
there's a
all
whole lot of
circle of life,
interconnection.
yeah, absolutely.
But if there's life to one,
It's like to all.
it will be, life to all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's precisely where, of course, the whole issue of why we have to take, when we are able to take care of the least in the community, it's a lot easier to take care of the other members of the community. Because what benefit the least, in the community, it will certainly benefit
Correct.
to the other members of the community.
Right. Right.
And that brings us back to justice.
Yes,
Yes.
Because there can really be no peace without justice.
without justice, no? Yeah.
So, Father Ray, it must have been such a struggle to have this all going on in your mind and in your heart, and being able to express that to your family, especially to your father, who had his own plans for your future.
Yeah, but of course, because of actually when I entered the seminary, they have no inkling, they have no idea. I admitted only when they would not provide me their marriage certificate, unless. So when my father said, "Tell us why you need this,"
Oh no.
and then it's the time we can release this document. Of course, he was surprised about entering into the seminary. And of course, in the seminary, we're also taught and trained as future Franciscans, to develop really the heart for the poor, because many of our ministries are with them. But I think it was also a challenge because it's not about being antagonistic, no, to people who have different views.
Yes.
Definitely.
Because, like for instance, especially some of my titos and titas would say, but you have to understand that we work hard for this. I said, yeah, I have no question about it. You all work hard for what you have, and that we have to also acknowledge. But I would go further. But now that you have, what you can do for those who have not. So, because if if there's something wrong in the system, and we benefited from that system, how can we reverse the whole situation? It's quite difficult because, of course, we have different values, and they would see me as, you know, a radical person in the family. So, no, I'm not a radical person. I'm just one of those, you know, trying to be serious with the life that I want to embrace. You know? And it does not mean that our relationship as a family would also suffer because I believe certain principles. No? Although I would say it, of course, will be a big thing if we can be together in this advocacy. You know, to change, to be able to help some change in the structure. But of course, it's not that easy,
Right.
as we have different, you know, views. But it remains a challenge to be also prophetic, even inside the family. No, to be able to explain why we are doing such activities like this, why we are our ministries, of course, uh, with poor people, uh, even in Mindanao. I remember after my ordination, because I volunteered for a mission down in the south, my mother called up and said, maybe if it's possible, you can go anywhere, but don't go to Mindanao. I mean, I understand her worries, no? But the thing is, this is part of our life. No? So uh, stewardship also of my vocation would mean uh, helping even my family members understand uh, how they can also participate in terms of stewardship. Being stewards also of my vocation, as I try to also become stewards of the life that they have. No?
Right.
No? So it's actually maybe I would say it's a mutual care. No, it's a mutual valuing. Uh, it's not about stepping on each other's life or whatever. So that I would say, kasi there are different ways where we can be a steward, no? In terms of our time, no? In terms of our talents, in terms of our resources, and there's a lot. No? In terms of our life, in terms of our vocation, we have to be stewards of all that God gave us, and there's so many. Because stewardship, I would say, from our maybe a Franciscan point of view, is a way of honoring the giver of the gifts. It's a way of praising. No? It's a way of valuing whatever the source of life, the source of all blessings had given us. So it's not just about managing something. And I think there's more than.
Yes.
That is why we're saying that stewardship is a way of life. It's not just an activity that we have to do once in a while.
And I think, Father, you hit on something very important. I would say that most of our viewers would say that they are reasonably good stewards of time, talent, and treasure. And they're probably right. But the point you made, I think, is a very important one, which is that an understanding and a realization that stewardship is not just common sense. It is common sense. It's logical because we're helping each other, that this whole circle of life thing, that all makes sense. But beyond that, the realization that this is of God, that it is scriptural, that it is so fundamental to who we are as Christians, that it should make even more sense. And in a sense, it should energize or empower our stewardship activities, because all of a sudden it's like the pieces fall into place. And like as we were talking about, it's as basic as Genesis. We've been talking about Genesis all this time. I mean, how much more fundamental can you get than that, right?
Yeah.
It just makes so much sense.
What I hear you saying, Father, then is stewardship, as you said, is a way of life, and it really begins with our intention and our attitude.
Yeah.
To just distill that for you know, in simplest terms, for me to be able to understand, it's really about our intention and our attitude towards life, which, you know, ironically or maybe not, that's what prayer is, that's what devotion is, that's what JPIC is, that's what mission, that's what everything really is.
Yeah, that's who we are.
That's who we are.
That's our identity.
Yes.
So it's the whole of our life. And therefore, it becomes, di ba, yung sinasabi nga ni Mana, sometimes we talk about prayer in terms of maybe allocating a time to be with God. But there's more than to it. And in prayer, there's really that call for us that we become prayer itself, no? Our whole life. And it's similar with stewardship.
Yes.
No? That stewardship is a form of prayer. No? It's an expression of thanksgiving.
And it's honoring our Creator,
In
the
the
giver
Creator,
of this life.
So, it nourishes, therefore, our relationship with God, with our brothers and sisters, with the whole of creation, and with even ourselves.
Right.
No?
Right.
Kasi for instance, if we go for talking about our own bodies, no? The whole idea that if my body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, how will I be able to become a good steward of my own body, which is the temple of the Holy Spirit? So discipline, control, moderation, you know, because it's one way of honoring, you know, my own body as a temple of the Holy Spirit.
I don't know if I got this right, Father, but I had read or heard, maybe even from one of our friars, that later on in his life, St. Francis perhaps came to this realization that under this whole idea of stewardship, that he might have taken better care of his own body in honoring the whole idea of stewardship, because he was very hard on himself. Right?
Yeah.
He drove himself relentlessly. He became blind. I mean, there were all sorts of ailments that I wouldn't say were self-imposed, but because he drove himself so much, he had almost forgotten about stewardship extending to caring
for the self.
Yeah.
Because I think I would say it was the influence of the penitential character of his life, and of course during the time,
it
was kind of part of the spirituality.
Yes, that's right.
Punishing the body or the penance as a way of disciplining oneself.
Yes.
But there are some other, of course, later on in terms of the development, there are other ways not to be excessive, not to to live in moderation. But that's where I think the contribution of ecology comes in. That's maintaining the balance.
Yes.
We have to put right balance in everything we do. Because whatever excess we may have, it will have an effect. Not only in terms of our personal relationship with others, or even with the whole of creation. So maintaining that balance is essential to a healthy ecology. And that also would be required of us as good stewards.
And I'm glad you brought that up, Father Ray, because that was the life that Francis lived in the context of his time.
Mhm.
And so I bring it to today's context, for myself, for us, for our viewers. So in the context of today's world, like you were saying, we have so many resources, we have social media, we have conspicuous consumption, we have everything really at our fingertips. How can you help us understand how it would be to live the Franciscan value in today's world? How can we be good stewards of the resources that we have in today's world, in the context of our own times?
Okay, maybe I would begin with reclaiming our identity as sons and daughters of God. I think that's fundamental. No? That I am not just a human being. I am not just one of the creations. But I have to acknowledge of that divine presence in me. That would be, I would say, the starting point. Because that divine presence that we can reclaim for ourselves, reconnect us with our God. And the moment we're reconnected with our God, we know who God is, for instance, in the course of our history. And much, of course, of God's revelation in history, we will be directed to take care of those who have less in life. And so this is where we can now start working for and not questioning, am I my brother's keeper? But rather, I am a brother to all. So if my relationship now is that of I am a brother to all of God's creation, I would say the first thing that we have to struggle with is the whole idea of self-satisfaction. What satisfies me? No? Kasi it's the self that becomes the center. Second, it's not just the whole issue of satisfying oneself, no? In terms of comfort, in terms of security. I would say it will bring you again to another plane of my action should not be a means of commodifying. In other words, the other that outside of me has become now a commodity. I think one thing that is also maybe it's not really that pronounced, but the whole issue of commodification, that even people becomes part only of the mode of production. Now, when we commodify people, when we commodify things, that is again an act contrary to the principle of I am a brother to all, because I commodify people. So that would be the third. The second. The third one, of course, the kind of action or decisions that I'm going to make for myself, would it be a life-giving one for others? Because if it gives life to others, I suppose it's life-giving also to me. Now, of course, there's a contrast. Eventually, when we have to lose our life, it's only the time when we find it. Now, that whole orientation of I have to take care. No? My mission is to nurture life, to nurture God's creation. So, that I would say are some basic and fundamental approach when we talk about the stewardship
Father, I'd like to tie back what you just said, particularly the second and third, and perhaps try to make a point that I don't think anybody will disagree with what you just said. But on the other hand, sometimes it's glaringly obvious what your actions are not or are not doing to fulfill this. But other times, the decisions are difficult in order to fulfill these. And I want to go back to a time again in your earlier years, shortly after the incident that we talked about with workers, as it has to do with the family business. I believe you were in the furniture business at the time, right? And it strikes me as you told us this story, and I'd love for you to tell our viewers about this again, how that was a difficult decision. It must have been a difficult decision. But at the same time, you were convicted that this was in fulfillment, in fact, of these three guides that we were talking about. It's a very subtle choice, I think, but at the same time, a clear choice for you, especially in hindsight. Tell us about that incident, Father Ray.
Okay, it was indeed a difficult decision, and actually there was some kind of disagreement, you know. But one thing that really, I would say, gives strength to me to be able to convince, for instance, you know, my other siblings, was the thought of we will be more blessed when our activities will not bring distraction to God's creation. So in other words, the pork nurture shop, it will definitely contribute to the distraction. But my faith then was telling me, no, if you do the right thing, the generosity of God cannot also be outdone. Because I was coming from, if everything is a gift from God, then what more really I can ask for? Or to make it more simple, if God knows what we need, should there be any struggle for me not to give up something that can destroy God's creation? So I was holding really more on the generosity that God will take care of us rather than just taking care of ourselves. I think that's where I was coming from.
And this decision, to be clear for the viewers, was a decision to close down the family business, which was in furniture.
Yeah, it's a furniture shop.
It was a furniture shop.
And of course, there are some other activities that, might contribute. I mean, it's not a big one. It's really a small, ordinary one. But it was very clear to me at the time that it's not only, destroying God's creation. It can also be a source or a means to perpetuate even corruption.
Yes.
Kasi may mga nangihingi. Siyempre, magbibigay ka rin para walang gulo. Yung mga ganun. But to me, parang yun yung ano eh.
Yeah.
But I think the whole of it, even in its smallness and ordinariness, I would say I was really coming from, if everything belongs to God, and everything we have is a gift of God, so I cannot discount. I cannot even not trust that God will take care of our needs. And there's some other ways to be able to, to compensate what you give up. For some other ways and for some other reasons. Kaya, I mean, actually during the time, it's not a big thing for me. But I was just thinking, simple way of, concretizing your personal conviction.
Yeah.
It's not a big one. it's actually nothing. No? But then, I think the whole exercise of it is something.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah.
So, we're saying, hindi kung wala yan, let's plant kamote.
And so,
No.
Father, and it's really interesting because I think for our viewers, it sort of clarifies a little bit of what stewardship is about, and that is, it starts with our intention, with our attitude, and our belief that everything comes from the Creator, and it's living out the intention of the Creator to take care of ourselves and our environment, because we are merely stewards. And then in our daily lives, find concrete ways, like you were saying, Father, to concretize or to at least be a manifestation of what that intention is inside of us.
Yes, precisely, because it's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle that we eventually develop. No? It's not actually it's not the amount, for instance, of resources. It's not the volume. No? When we talk about resources of, stewardship of resources. But of course, with time, maybe we can also look into it more deeply.
Right.
No?
Right.
The time, in the context of stewardship, I would invite our viewers, to think of time not only in terms of whether we become productive of what we have done. I would bring into the reflection of, in relation to time, we should consider not time as in terms of chronology, but maybe we can talk about time as kairos. It's the moment of grace.
Correct.
So, in terms of our usage of time, does it bring us more closer also to God? No? That the time we spend, does it nurture our relationship with one another?
Right.
No? So that's another area for stewardship.
Yes.
So it's not just having our schedule from 8 o'clock in the morning up to 10 o'clock in the evening full. But it might be full, but it becomes meaningless.
Yeah.
It does not promote, for instance, deeper relationship with our co-workers. It does not develop, sense of communal life or fraternal life with the people around us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we may have enough time, but it does not really mean we manage it well. We use it as intentionally provided for us by God. No? So, parang was there a way of transformation, conversion, really becoming a better person
Right.
with us, or with myself. So that's another angle in terms of stewardship.
Yeah.
I think it brings back, Father, to what you were saying earlier in our conversation, in our chat today. It's really about asking ourselves, how do I use my resources? Like, it's not so much the amount of resources, but how do I use my resources? What is my consumption of it? Accountability, as you were saying, and how does it bear fruit? Like you were saying, it's how does it promote life-giving, being more life-giving? And I think that really is, it's food for thought.
Yes.
For all of us.
For sure.
Especially with the issue of stewardship, and perhaps at some point in the future we can have another conversation.
Yes.
In a more deeper way.
Such a big topic, for sure.
Yeah. I do understand that we cannot really,
Yeah.
discuss everything within a very short period of time.
Yeah.
But maybe, and hopefully, it will just help us start our reflection and prayer about this topic. So hopefully, our discussion will also enrich, not simply of providing our minds things to ponder, but hopefully it will provide our hearts
Yes.
matters to embrace.
Yeah, Father, it is definitely more than just food for thought. It is certainly, I think what you've done is you've given us an opportunity to appreciate how our stewardship is blessed by an awareness that this is all, that this is all part of God's plan, and that this is the responsibility that has been given to us as I love the word you use, co-creators. That's such a mantle of responsibility that's been given to us as part of God's plan. So we want to thank you very much, Father Ray, for this. It's certainly been a blessing to discuss this topic with you, and I'm sure that our viewers feel blessed as well. Thank you again for being with us.
Thank you very
Father.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Father Rayu, Len, and Dennis. That was another insightful conversation. Father Rayu opened today's episode by saying that the earth is God's gift to us, and we are called to till the earth and all its creatures, and this can only be done with humility, as everything belongs to God, as nothing is of our own. Like Saint Francis, Father Rayu shares that it is when he immersed himself with God's creation, living and non-living, that he got to see the true meaning of stewardship. As co-creators, God has given us everything we need to care for what he has entrusted to us. And as we benefit from the system, we are called to give back. At this point, we would like to again turn you over to our viewers. What have you taken away from this session? What are the circumstances in your life that cause you to feel the greatest responsibility to exercise the value of stewardship? Please take a few moments to write down the question and reflect on the answer. Next week, we will start our session with a sharer and also get to know our next friar. Thank you for joining us in today's Fireside Chats. See you in next week's episode entitled Discover Your Purpose, where we will talk about another Franciscan charism, mission and service.
Lord, make me an instrument is injury, let me so pardon. Where there is doubt, let there be faith. Where there's despair, let me so hope. Where there is darkness, let there be light. Where there is sadness, joy. Oh, divine Master, grant that I may never seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning